State Rep Tom Demmer is taking time out of his morning for us. Tom, good morning to you.
Hey, morning, guys. How are you?
We're doing great. How's everything going this morning?
It's a little chilly down here in Springfield, but other than that, we're okay.
Is it attitude and disposition or atmospheric?
I think both reads are correct.
Depends who you're hanging around, you know?
Yeah, right.
Tom, a little bit of big news. Last night, a spokesman for Mike Madigan, Steve Brown, telling at least the Associated Press, if not other entities, there doesn't appear like there's going to be a vote on a minimum wage hike, again, quoting him, during this General Assembly. Now, to me, that means not just now, but also during a potential lame duck session in January. Mike Madigan basically saying a minimum wage hike is off the table until we have a Governor Rauner in place.
Yeah, you know, that is a little bit of a surprise. When Governor Quinn offered his concession speech, he did say that the one thing he wanted to work on before the end of his term was a minimum wage increase. So a lot of folks took that to mean that would be one of the key issues that was on the table during this veto session or maybe the lame duck session. I think after, though, the action by the Chicago City Council yesterday, raising the minimum wage in Chicago, I think the proposal to do so across the state lost a little bit of steam.
I guess it was odd to see the speaker after, you know, this amazing amount of momentum, or what we were told was momentum, and charge forward on this all of a sudden go, yeah, there's complications, you know, the vote, and we're not really sure. As a member of just the general public, you're going to get a little whiplash trying to follow this.
No, that's true, and I'm not sure that the momentum that you described has actually been there. There's been some hesitation, not just from folks who have been outspoken on the issue from the spring session, but also from folks who I think have heard from some unlikely opponents to this. It hasn't been the way that the argument was initially framed of, hey, there's these big corporations, and hey, what's the big deal for them if they part with a few extra bucks? People started to see that that's not really the case here, and we started to hear from a lot of not-for-profit organizations, from a lot of community groups, from cities, from colleges, places that you wouldn't necessarily expect, and you certainly couldn't describe as big, deep-pocketed corporations who wouldn't miss a few bucks. So I think as that kind of narrative shifted, people started to give a second look to their maybe initial support for the bill.
And we're told, Tom, that the minimum wage hike would pump more money into the economy and would stimulate things, but Illinois already has a higher minimum wage than any state around us, and we're lagging behind the rest of them. If that argument were true, we should be outpacing Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, and the others due to our higher minimum wage, and we know that's not true.
Yeah, that's true, and I think there's also a misunderstanding of just some of the numbers. The number of people who are actually on minimum wage right now, and then the ages of those people, the types of jobs that they're working. It's sometimes there are certainly cases of people who are trying to support a family on minimum wage jobs, but in a lot of cases, we're talking about people who are working temporary jobs, younger workers, people just entering the workforce. I think the focus shouldn't be on trying to bring up the very bottom wage. It should be trying to give people more job opportunities, so when they go out to the market, they have the choice to find something better than a minimum wage job.
Well, yeah, if you increase somebody's top-end opportunities, it gives them a lot more impetus to get themselves off the lower end of things and move up that ladder as quickly as they can.
Yeah, competition in the job market is the quickest way to raise wages, because when people have options, they're going to be able to weigh one company's package against another, maybe hours or shift or wages or benefits. When we get people trapped is when there's no other job opportunities at all, and they really can't leave what they've got right now.
State Rep Tom Demmer with us here. It's Ronnie and Scot on WROK. If you could real quickly, Ronnie alluded to this. How is the Chicago situation complicating matters in Springfield? Chicago, Rahm Emanuel decided they'd go first. They'd go before Springfield in terms of raising their minimum wage. They voted on it yesterday. I think that's mainly one of the big complications that Mike Madigan is looking at right now. How did that change the calculus in Springfield?
Well, I think you have to look at the fact that there are a number of legislators who represent the city of Chicago, many who represent nothing but the city of Chicago, whose districts are entirely made up by the city. So when they look back to their constituents, maybe who they were supporting the minimum wage increase in order to try to benefit those folks, they see that basically the same was achieved. Actually, a higher minimum wage was achieved by the city council. So it kind of lessened the drive to say, let's make a state change to this, because, for all practical purposes, their districts were taken care of before. And so if you start to, maybe lessen the intensity of support from some folks who think that the issue's been solved in their own districts, and combine that with what I described as, maybe some folks who were leaning towards it but started to hear from some unlikely opponents or some opponents for whom the effects might have been a little bit of a burden. Those two things together, I think, maybe just didn't lead them to get the number of votes they needed.
Yeah, there's not even a unanimity, as obviously the speaker pointing out some of the complications in not having the votes. Looking at a comment here, Democratic State Rep Patrick, I hope I have the name right, Verschoor of Milan, Western Illinois District, businesses that see competition from Iowa already has a lower state rate than Illinois. So all that's going to happen is, hey, how about if we move a few blocks away from here?
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. Actually, in the debate yesterday in the Chicago City Council, some folks brought up the fact that it was going to be a competitive disadvantage for businesses that were located right at the city limits of Chicago, right at the edge, because you could easily move right across to the street and be in, suburban Cook County somewhere. And I think the same kind of logic could be applied to the state of Illinois. There's always going to be a border somewhere, and there's always going to be communities and businesses that are located very close to that border. So, Representative Verschoor over in the Quad Cities area, certainly up in the Rockford area, so many communities in Illinois have some crossover employees, people who, every day drive back and forth across a state line. And that just shows you how a mobile workforce is, willing to drive 5 or 10 miles. And sometimes you can drive that far and end up in a place that has a whole different set of rules.
State Rep Tom Demmer with us. It's Riley and Scott here on WROK. The possibility of the state creating its own Obamacare exchange. This is something that's becoming a little bit more in the forefront because of the possibility the Supreme Court would rule on the subsidies. The case in front of them now is whether or not the law explicitly states, which it does, that you only get subsidies if your state has an exchange, but they have not decided on that yet. There's a push in Springfield to get Illinois to create its own exchange. That vote could come today, I guess, right?
Yeah, I actually think it will come up this morning. Our session day for tomorrow has been canceled, so if they want to run it during this veto session, it'll have to come today. I expect it will. This is, as you described, this is a very complicated case because of the fact that there hasn't been a ruling by the United States Supreme Court on this. So, we're kind of waiting for interpretation of federal law. So I think it's kind of premature for the state to come in and decide what to do today based on speculation of what will happen tomorrow. There's also, a number of logistical concerns with this. We saw, what was a totally flawed rollout of healthcare.gov. I pulled up an article yesterday that said the federal government spent more than $2 billion on putting together the healthcare.gov website. I saw another example in the state of Oregon. Oregon spent $250 million trying to build their own state exchange. It failed to sign up any single person for coverage, for private health insurance coverage, and they ended up having to go to a federal exchange like Illinois did because they just couldn't get theirs to work. So there's a real worry about what the costs of this are going to be, whether or not Illinois should take ownership of this. What's the long-term implications of us signing on to kind of a blank check of how much this will cost, how much it'll cost to operate, and whether or not we can actually execute it better than the federal government has done.
And it might be better just to leave it in their lap as it stands right now. Anyway, they're having such a field day in administering all of this. Why jump in and muck things up for them?
Yeah, I mean, and we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to say either. And they may come out with a ruling that is kind of a straight strike down of that statute. They may give some clarification to what it means and what some of the definitions might be. I don't want to be back here in a year trying to pass a bill that cleans up something that we shouldn't have messed up in the first place.
State Rep Tom Demmer with us here from Illinois' 90th District. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. Through the House yesterday, the Secure Choice Act. And I know you were a no vote on this. We've talked about it in the past. It actually was kind of dormant for a while, then came back here in this fall veto session. This is such a bad idea in my mind. What it says basically is if you're an employer and you don't offer a retirement plan to your employee, a 401k type system, then this bill would force you to automatically enroll all your employees in the secure choice system unless the employee opts out, and then would force the employer to deduct at least 3% from each paycheck to put in the secure choice system, then the state, who can't really run much of anything, would be in charge of running this new retirement system, all because the argument goes, well, people don't have access to retirement-type programs. There's, IRAs and Roth IRAs, and heck, you can get them in the savings accounts and money market accounts if you want, but, the state thinks, the Democrats think at least, you got to create a whole new program to do this. Is that about right?
You summed it up very well there. I think the concept of increasing people's personal retirement savings is an important one. We know that Social Security, first, the health of the system has been in doubt for years, but second, it's not designed to be the only source of income in retirement for people, and so we need to encourage investment in personal retirement savings. However, for several of the reasons that you described here, this bill just wasn't the right way to do that. It was a mandate on a lot of employers. It applied to every employee. It automatically enrolled them unless they opted out. It put together a state oversight that. Anytime there's state oversight, there's an opportunity maybe for politics to enter into the decision-making process. Some of those things were just a little uncomfortable to say this is a program that's actually going to achieve what we want. So I think this is a good example of one of those where the good intention of trying to get people to save their own money towards their own retirement. That's a good idea and a good practice for people to put in place. But when you look at the bill that went through yesterday, I just don't think it was the right formula to do that.
Speaking of money, I got to ask you before we let you get out of here. What do you make of Bruce Rauner's comments that wow, I've been looking things over and it's a lot worse down here than we were led to believe.
Well, I think there's been a lot of funny accounting going on at the state level for several years. We've pointed this out, each year as one year's bills get pushed off into the next year in order to deliver a so-called balanced budget, which obviously is not truth in accounting. I mean, that's just an accounting gimmick. We've also seen, other places where transfers from one fund to another were counted as income in order to increase spending. I think there's a lot of this accounting going on that is less than truthful and probably has led us to be in a worse situation than we even think, which, we think it's a pretty bad situation, so that's really saying something.
State Rep Tom Demmer, before we let you go, back to secure choice real quickly. That already passed the Senate back in April, right? So this goes to the governor.
That's true, yes. There were some amendments, which I think it's got to go back to the Senate for concurrence, but I think that'll happen.
And according to the law, the board that will run this retirement program is newly created, a new board. Is that under the treasurer's oversight? Who would be the oversight?
It is under the oversight of the state treasurer, yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to get deeper in the weeds here. We have a state treasurer who's just been elected, Mike Frericks, Tom, who has promised to replace the fund manager for Bright Start, even though it's doing a great job because it doesn't invest highly enough in renewable energy and solar panels and all the stuff he wants to invest in. So now you'd have a situation where not only would a treasurer be able to have some sort of say over parents' college savings and how that's managed, but now this mandatory retirement savings program also would be influenced by perhaps the whims of the state treasurer to say, no, you have to invest in wind farms with your retirement money. Is that right?
Yeah, it certainly could be. I mean, okay. That's what I mentioned before. Politics coming into some of these decisions is not necessarily going to be the best shake for people who have their money in this. We don't need somebody to go out and make campaign statements about how money should be invested. We should let the best return come to individual investors and grow it that way.
And was there any discussion before the vote in the House about what it would cost these private employers to comply with secure choice?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about that, and especially as we were, kind of hearing from both sides about the bill. Employers say there's going to be a cost with it. It's a little hard to say exactly what the cost is going to be. It varies based on what kind of payroll system you have and things like that. So there will be some kind of cost. It's just we didn't have a ready estimate of what that might be.
State Rep Tom Demmer, as always, we appreciate your time, and thanks for being on with us. We look forward to talking to you again real soon.
You bet. Great to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Tom.